Hi, Hot Metal Bridge Faith Community. Welcome to another week in this Pride Month as we continue this series of lifting up voices and stories of people from the LGBTQIA plus community that are already in our midst here at Hot Metal. I'm Pastor Erin Jones. I am a cisgender, white, straight, female pastor. I forget all the other things that I identify as. My pronouns are she and hers. And today I am so excited to have some time to talk and hear the story of Scot Hines, who I know many of you know. If you have ever walked into anything happening at Hot Metal, you have probably met Scot. And I am so excited to hear Scot's story and to have this time with him. So I'll let him introduce himself before we get going.
Oh, thanks. This has really been kind of fun getting ready for this. My name again is Scot Hines. In 1969, we tried very hard not to use any pronouns. So in the history of gay movement, there's been changes in language, and I can't keep track of all of them anymore. I just learned yesterday, I think I'm cisgendered. So that's me. So in 1969, most people think that's when the movement started. But just like what's happening today, it was a tipping point. It was a point that we just weren't going to take it anymore. So in 1969, before the Stonewall Uprising, there was a group of gay Christians that started MCC, Metropolitan Community Church, which you'll see has a pretty big part in my story. And also in 1969, Marcia Stevens wrote a hymn, "For Those Tears I Died." And that is kind of a thread through my story as well. What else was clear, I didn't know about any of that in 1969, but what I did know in 1969 is like Jesus was my best friend, and I knew that I was called into ministry. I was probably one of the few first graders who was certain. There was just never any other question. So, you know, there I was, this little kid, very religious and pretentious, and in an all-white church, and not even realizing how small my world was. Mm-hmm. And things started happening at church and in society. There was a backlash in 1969, and that came around 1972. And I started hearing things like in church that made me really wonder how this path was going to proceed. My path into ministry, you know, in the Methodist Church, there's a real step process. And it was just like, I'll just stay on the steps till I figure it out. And then in 1972, I started hearing Anita Bryant on the news, and I didn't quite understand what that was all about. But I knew for some reason, even at the age of 8, that I wasn't going to drink Florida orange juice. And for those of you who don't know what that was about, there's a piece of gay history that you can look up. Also, the link for that song is in the comments. Right. So that was kind of like my early church life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that. What a time to be so steeped in church culture, and then also to have all these really important cultural moments happening, and to not know, right, like to have an inkling that they are maybe about you, but not really know how, and yeah.
It's like I knew church and Jesus before I knew gay people existed. But then what I started to learn from church is not only they existed, but for some people they were an issue. And so in 1972, the Methodist Church adopted the current language that they have now, which is homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. If that was true, how the hell was I going to be a minister? Because I wanted to teach people about the gospel. I wanted to live the gospel. So I didn't know where I would be going in the Methodist Church. I just kept taking those steps. And the conflict just would keep building and building and building. And there were some really, really dark times there. And if people want to hear more about those dark times, the movie that there's also a link for below, Prayers for Bobby. If you watch that, that was based on Bobby's diary. I could have written Bobby's diary. I mean, that's how similar it is. So that was the pain part. And then the second part of the movie is Bobby's mother learning how to integrate her spirituality and the fact that her son was gay. And I lived that part too. So I was lucky I got to live that part. Bobby didn't. So anyway, there it is.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Bobby's story. That story is the story of so many people who weren't able to have the opportunity, right? Because the negative messages of the church and of society were too great, and so
and there was no escape.
Yeah,
there's no escape. Because, you know, I mean, in the movie, Bobby kills himself. That's not a spoiler alert. It's on the cover probably. But that's a sin too. And you'll hear Bobby talk about that and wrestle with that. So it was like, there was no escape. I was on this trajectory to be a pastor in the United Methodist Church. I was an official candidate for ministry. I went through college and did all the council on ministry meetings and stuff where they would, you know, they interrogate you. And I specifically remember one meeting where I won't say the person's name, but it was said, well, Scott, we know you like girls, so that won't be a problem.
And you're like, do we know that? Oh.
Well, yeah, I like girls. But I turned and I saw another person in that meeting that I knew for a long time. And I looked in their eyes and I knew they knew. And so then integrity was on the line. Do I pretend and get inside the church and try and change things? Or what do I do? And my home church, Sharon First United Methodist, burned to the ground in my first year of seminary. And my faith burned to the ground at the same time. I was done with God, with the church thing, the church building that all of the things in my life happened in was gone, and so was that stained glass window is from that church that burned down.
Oh, really? Wow.
So I was done. I was just going to do the gay thing.
Yeah, I took it as a literal act of God. Like, all right, well, that's done now.
Yeah, was that a sign?
Yeah.
But I used it as a sign. And I really did. I knew I was done with the Methodist. Well, I thought I was done with the Methodist Church. But I felt really done with God. And then so I decided I'd just do the gay thing. And my therapist said, you have to get to know other gay people. And suggested that I go to MCC, a gay church. And I thought, okay, well, that's cool. I mean, I don't want anything to do with the religion part of it, but I'll meet other gay people.
Yeah.
So went there, and God kept calling and calling and calling. And at the March on Washington, I decided to go to that. And of course, I went in the church bus because my life was church. Even though I was done with God in church, it still seemed to be the bus I would go on.
Well, they can't, might as well. At least I know.
And that was just a life-changing experience. It moved me into a different chapter, but a whole different kind of struggle. And the struggle was then to integrate, because first of all, when I got to the march and there were thousands of gay Christians, I'd never been with, first of all, so many gay people and Christians, And when we marched that march, and we marched past the God hates fags people.
Yes.
We as gay Christians were singing Jesus loves me, this I know. And the people who were watching the parade, they got to see that there were gay Christians. But everyone else in that parade only saw God hates fags. And that was the representation of the church. Unity at a time when people were dying because AIDS was hitting. And so you'd go to church and somebody who was there last week isn't there anymore. And when I saw that sign, it pissed me off. God doesn't hate fags. I'm absolutely certain of that. I didn't know what it meant for me, but I knew that somebody needed to counter that message for all the other groups that were going to march by those people that day. So that started the journey of integrating. And I could believe it for others long before I could believe it for me. Oh, wow. So I could advocate for others.
Isn't that
and at the same time,
often easier? Yeah. And what a great witness of gospel that you all embodied in that moment, right? To not retaliate in hatred, but to show, really to put your money, your bodies where your mouth is, right?
Yeah, I had to do that a lot, and it wasn't always easy. I actually went to boot camp to learn how to do some of that. Because my part of the gay movement was all about church. When I went to the March on Washington, the big issues they were pushing were the exclusion in the military, which also used the word incompatible, the exact same one Methodists continue to use. I don't know where I was going with that. Those Methodists threw me.
That's what you were talking about, right? When you were at the March on Washington, it was coming alongside how you were always part of the church side of the movement, right?
Okay, so Soul Force is the group that I went to boot camp. And Soul Force was founded by Mel White, who was the ghostwriter for most of Jerry Falwell's books. A longtime friend of Jerry's, and still goes to the Baptist church that Jerry started.
Oh, wow.
So then my advocacy turned more toward the church. And we would have direct actions, is what we called them. And we would go to any time the church was having their annual meeting or their general assembly, we would be there.
Yeah. Specifically the United Methodist Church or any?
No, every. If there was a national church meeting, Soul Force was there. I wasn't personally. I went to the United Methodist ones and a few other direct action things. But the United Methodist ones that I went to, again, God Hates Fags was there. They were there with their signs. They were there with their Bible verses. And when we were having a direct action at the General Assembly in Cleveland, we wanted to go inside and be with them, and they didn't want us. And people were arrested for trespassing. And we were left outside. All the other Christians gathered inside, and we were left outside with representation of the church coming from Fred Phelps. You know, a lot of people have seen those signs now, but he was at every gay thing for 10 years before anybody in the general community when he started to picket funerals, I think especially Shepard. And then I also went to a direct action in Pittsburgh, and this time they let us in. And we marched through the conference floor, and the theme was all on water, and we all brought our water to symbolize our baptism. And as we surrounded the space afterwards, I realized the person standing next to me, Rainey Wan, was my supervising pastor when I was a candidate for ministry in the Methodist Church.
Wow.
And Rainey's sign said, "Stop baptizing them if you won't ordain them." And that was the first time I kind of felt a betrayal of my baptism. But I just, I knew that I didn't really want anything to do with like organized churches and stuff. And that's why I fit in a hot metal. It's not very organized. But I went to MCC for years and kind of integrated there. And then it seemed weird to have just a gay church. And it seemed like church was incomplete still. So I felt called to co-found a church that was called Open Arms. And our mission statement was that we're radically inclusive, Christ-centered, growing in faith, united in ministry, and dedicated to mission. We were a church that lived it. And there were all different kinds of people there. And we had communion every week, and it was an open table. And so it was so much like hot metal in a lot of ways. That when I came to hot metal, I wondered if maybe they copied our business model. And so that went on for about 10 years. And there were some leadership changes, but there was also a change in the world. And gay Christians didn't have to travel from West Virginia and Greensburg and Erie to Open Arms in Pittsburgh. They had gone to other places now. So Open Arms merged with, we were trying to become a UCC or Disciples Congregation. And we eventually merged with a much larger UCC. They welcomed us with open arms. They changed their name to include Open Arms. And we basically helped that church die and liquidate their assets. So then I church shopped for a while. And my mother kept insisting that I go to hot metal. And wasn't where I thought they should be in being open and affirming. But I could have been okay with that part, but I really struggled with the affiliation with the Methodist.
After years of fighting, I would be weary.
No, but my mother, she's like, she's all in Methodist leadership, and my family history runs deep in the Methodist Church. My uncle's name was actually John Wesley.
Very Methodist. Okay.
To go to hot metal because of that. But I made a deal with my mother that if she'd stop bugging me about it, I would go, and then we'd be done with it. And like I said, it was so much like open arms. I mean, open table communion, all of that, everything felt right, except they weren't where I thought they should be on being open and affirming. But I was tired of that fight. I didn't fight that fight anymore. I just wanted to go to church. I just wanted a place where I could do my ministry and and answer what I'm called to do, and that's invite other people to the table. That's to let gay people know that they're not only invited to the table. The Methodists used to, I don't know if they still do this, but there used to be in the responsive readings a line that said, we are not worthy to gather up the crumbs under this your table. I get what they were trying to say, but I needed the church to tell me I was worthy. And so my ministry has been to tell people that they're worthy to come to the table. Doesn't matter whether they're gay or straight or, and when I came to hot metal after the service, I heard somebody who was homeless. I heard a church member say to them, wait a minute, I think I have a sleeping bag downstairs for you. And all of a sudden I knew I had to keep going there.
Darn Holy Spirit. Like, yeah.
But so I actually sat down with Jeff and Jim and I told them both I wasn't going to try and stir up any trouble. I won't accept any condemnation. I'll just be quiet and I'll just do the homeless ministry. I avoided all leadership roles. I wanted nothing to do with church politics. And that's just when I started doing the homeless ministry and discovering that there are a lot of people who need to be invited to the table, that a lot of churches say they have an open table, but they don't. It sounds good, but it's more for show. And some of you may know Al. Al was homeless, and Al said when he came to hot metal and said he was homeless, people hugged him. When he went to other churches, as soon as he said that, he was shunned and he was no longer really welcome and certainly didn't feel welcome to the table. So I saw this whole other group of people that needed to know that they were welcome. And so for years, I'd go out every Saturday with the homeless team. And it was really cool because we could take the table to them. We could meet them where they were at and actually invite them to church tomorrow. And I could do that knowing that what was becoming my church would receive them and that the table truly was open. So that's how I got hooked with hot metal.
Yeah. Well, what a long journey, and what like you said at the beginning, right? There's so much in your story that mirrors this journey that the church, like capital C, has been on, and the fact that you have been a part of moving us toward what we are becoming, right? Generally, I know you're right. The UMC still officially has those language on the books, but we see a turning point happening in so many denominations, and it's because of witnesses like you all.
Well, and it's also because of allies. Jeff Sterling, pastor at the United Methodist Church in McNutt Road, there are people inside the church that are fighting for us now. they're no longer silent. They don't let Fred Phelps speak for the church anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the fact that even though they're still fighting over it for decades now, we're not invisible, and we're not a target without people to defend us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why allies are so important. Um, and that's kind of one of the advantages in the gay movement compared to some racial movements was when we come out, there are people that have known us and loved us all our lives and suddenly now have to deal with
Mm-hmm.
it. Black people are to start from that spot where there's no coming out, they just are.
Mm-hmm.
They have family to support them and stuff, but it doesn't really change society as quickly as when some of the people most opposed to gay rights find out that their son's gay.
Right.
Um, and I at the March on Washington, when they were asking for marriage and military, I just thought that was ridiculous. When they were asking for non-discrimination employment, I thought that was the first thing that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened until 2 days ago with the Supreme Court ruling.
Right.
So I know there's a lot of work to do yet, but there's been a lot of work done.
Yeah.
I think we're all on the right path.
Yeah. And it's not an easy one, and right, and it's been going on for a long time, and yet we're welcoming more people onto the journey
Mhm.
with us. And I guess that's my question that I've been asking people in the LGBTQIA community at Hot Metal. What are your hopes as we, right? You said when you started they weren't quite where you thought perhaps we needed to be. Has that changed in your time here, and where do you hope we are going?
Well, it certainly changed enough that I felt comfortable being active in leadership.
Yeah.
So I was on council, and Jeff ordained me as an elder, and it wasn't an issue for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So while I never knew where individuals were or are on their personal journey,
Mm-hmm.
it was okay. Um, I just needed to be me and be present and let them figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could help with that for somebody who's really trying to figure it out, I'm open to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But people would have, people who want to be an ally would have to do some reading and stuff first, because I stopped fighting with Christians a long time ago. It just isn't productive.
Mm-hmm.
So with leadership, I knew as much as anybody would know, like the kind of official stance of open arm or of Hot Metal. One of the things though that concerned me was that at one point we had a gathering of LGBTQ people, and I was afraid that there were some of them in there who thought that their sexuality was their brokenness.
Mm.
And so I started feeling challenged, like I couldn't keep my mouth shut as much about this,
Mm.
because there could be people there thinking we're all broken. And in Hot Metal, we all share our brokenness, but your sexuality is not your brokenness. God made you that way. You got to figure out why. Took me a
Mm.
long time. But when I said to that group that I've discovered that my sexuality is a gift from God,
Mm.
there were people who looked shocked. And so where I hope we go is that people are not only welcome, but it's a place that's safe to figure it out, and there can be conversations about it. We had conversations every Saturday doing homeless ministry. And I
Mhm.
mean, it was just when you're doing that kind of stuff together,
Yeah.
those conversations were just natural, but I didn't see them happening in other places. And I don't want people to think that their sexuality is their brokenness.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're all broken in so many ways, but
That's not one. Yeah. Wow. What a beautiful hope, and thank you for that message, because I think you're right. Not um, even liberal, open, affirming churches aren't always that explicit about it in our countering of that message, to be able to say no, like this is actually a gift, and we
that was hard to figure out with metal. I had Jack and Larry who could tell me like who they knew was safe.
mm-hmm.
Um, but when those conversations are going on, that's an indication that it's leaning towards safe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I was so glad that I wasn't involved in that part, because some people left the church, and if I was involved in that part, I would have felt like here again I'm responsible for people leaving the church.
Mm-hmm.
So the timing was just right, that like I didn't really involve myself with this issue much at all, other than living it um, until probably 5 years after I started
Mm-hmm.
on the hot metal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, thank you for number one, just living it and being yourself, and I think that moved the ball, right, in and of itself, and then for all the ways in which you are a witness, and the ways in which you have taken on leadership, whether you know it or not, right? When I first started like saying to staff and leadership, like, I think I want to do this like Pride series and like hear people's stories, and they were like, Scot needs to be on the top of your list, like. And so thank you so much um, for being that person that so many people now look to with hope and admiration for what you have done and all you have done. Um, and I'll let you have the last word. Any final parting words before we sign off here?
I don't care who you are. Jesus waits for you at the table to welcome you with open arms.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think somehow you're not worthy, think again, because Jesus, and in this song, he not only says, come to the water, but he'll stand by my side because he knows I'm afraid of other Christians. So don't let any barrier come between you and Jesus. Amen.
Amen.